My name is Olivia Brooks. I'm 33 years old, and for nearly 5 years I lived in what should have been a quiet apartment building in a peaceful suburban neighbourhood. From the outside it looked perfectly normal, just 4 small apartments inside an old converted house. 2 retired couples, me, and 1 neighbour who managed to make life miserable for everyone else. His name was Derek Mason. If you asked him, he'd probably tell you everyone in the building hated him because people were judgmental. The truth was much simpler. He never respected anyone else's right to live in peace. Almost every night, someone different showed up at his apartment. Sometimes 1 person, sometimes 5 or 6. They slammed car doors, shouted in the hallway, played music until sunrise, and if someone wasn't pounding on his front door at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were ringing everyone else's doorbells instead. The first few times it happened, I assumed it was an accident. By the 10th time, I knew better. Working from home made everything worse. I spent my days attending online meetings, taking client calls, trying to focus. Meanwhile, the hallway outside my apartment sounded like a train station. People arguing, people laughing, people stumbling around obviously intoxicated. More than once, someone tried opening my apartment door by mistake. Or maybe not by mistake. I never found out. The other 2 apartments belonged to elderly couples. George and Helen lived downstairs. Mr. and Mrs. Whittaker lived across from me. They'd been there for years. Quiet, friendly, the kind of neighbours who watered each other's plants during vacations. Whenever we'd pass in the hallway, the conversation almost always ended the same way. "Derek again?" someone would sigh. Then we'd all shake our heads. None of us enjoyed talking about him, but eventually, everyone had a story. A broken car window, trash dumped outside their door, late-night arguments, packages disappearing. The list kept growing. I wasn't the only person who noticed. Our neighbourhood had started changing. Cars were getting broken into, mailboxes were vandalised, delivery drivers complained about strangers hanging around the property. Several neighbours had security cameras, more than once. Those cameras caught the same unfamiliar faces walking in and out of Derek's apartment at all hours. One afternoon, Derek actually admitted something that surprised me. He shrugged and casually said, "Yeah, some of my buddies get a little carried away sometimes." As though theft and vandalism were just harmless personality quirks. Then he laughed. "I can't control what they do." Maybe not, but he certainly never told them to stop. The worst part wasn't the noise, it was the deliveries. Because of the building's layout, every package was left in the shared entrance hall. The delivery companies ignored my instructions almost every time. I'd written, "Please do not leave packages unattended." They left them anyway. Sometimes outside, sometimes just inside the main entrance, completely visible, completely unprotected. At first, I thought the missing deliveries were bad luck. A package disappeared, then another, then another. An expensive set of headphones, a birthday gift for my sister, groceries, even replacement bank cards that had arrived by mail. Everything simply vanished. Whenever I confronted Derek, his answer never changed. "Wasn't me." He'd smile, shrug, then close the door. 5 minutes later, one of his friends would walk out, carrying a backpack that looked suspiciously fuller than when he'd arrived. The police were called more than once. So was the landlord. Nothing ever happened. Without proof, there wasn't much anyone could do. Suspicion wasn't evidence. Everyone knew who was responsible. No one could prove it. And Derek knew it too. That's what made him so confident. Over the years, I lost hundreds of dollars worth of deliveries. Every missing package made me a little angrier. Not because of the money, because of the feeling. The feeling that someone believed they could take whatever belonged to you and laugh while doing it. One evening, after discovering yet another package had disappeared within minutes of being delivered, I stood alone in the empty hallway. The security camera I'd recently ordered had been stolen too. I looked at the empty spot beside my apartment door and quietly said to myself, "Fine. If you insist on stealing my packages, I'll make sure the next one is impossible to resist. At that moment, I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning something much more dangerous for Derek. Proof. And once I finally had that, everything else would happen on its own. After a while, I stopped setting an alarm. I didn't need one anymore. Derek's visitors handled that for me. Some nights it was 2 a.m, other nights 3, sometimes even later. The doorbell would ring once, then again. Then someone would start pounding on the main entrance, hard enough to shake the entire building. If Derek didn't answer quickly enough, his friends would simply keep knocking, or yelling, or kicking the door. The first few times, I'd stumble out of bed thinking there was an emergency. There never was. It was always another visitor looking for Derek. Eventually, I stopped checking. I knew exactly who they were there for. The building itself wasn't very large. Since it had originally been a single-family home before being converted into 4 apartments, everyone shared the same front entrance and hallway. That meant every visitor, every delivery, every piece of mail passed through the same small space. Normally, that wouldn't have been a problem, unless one resident treated the entire building like his personal clubhouse. Derek almost never closed the main entrance properly. He'd prop it open with a brick, or leave it slightly unlatched. When I asked him why, he shrugged. "My friends come by all the time. I don't want them waiting outside." I stared at him. "So everyone else is supposed to leave their homes unlocked because it's convenient for you?" He laughed. "You worry too much." No, I worried exactly the right amount, because within days, strangers I'd never seen before were wandering through the hallway as if they lived there. One Saturday morning, I opened my apartment door to take out the trash. Beer cans covered the floor. Someone had spilled food across the staircase. One of the hallway lights had been smashed. There was even a shoe sitting in the corner. Just one. No one ever came back for it. When George came downstairs, he looked around and sighed. "Looks like they had another party." Helen shook her head. "We're too old for this." They weren't angry anymore, just exhausted. Living next to Derek had slowly worn everyone down. Things got worse as the months passed. Several neighbours on our street started installing security cameras, not because crime had always been a problem, because suddenly it was. Cars were being broken into overnight. Packages disappeared from porches. Garden sheds were vandalised. One evening, Mr. Whittaker knocked on my door. You should see this. He invited me into his apartment. On his television, a security camera recording played. 3 men walked down the street shortly after midnight. One of them tried opening parked car doors. Another smashed a side mirror before laughing. The third man, I recognised immediately. He'd been inside Derek's apartment less than an hour earlier. Mr. Whittaker paused the video. "You know him?" I nodded. "He practically lives next door." Neither of us needed to say anything else. Derek wasn't even trying to hide who his friends were anymore. One afternoon, I happened to run into him while checking my mailbox. He noticed me looking at 2 unfamiliar men carrying large duffel bags into his apartment. He grinned. "Relax, they're just friends." I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up my mail and turned to leave. Before I reached the stairs, he called after me. "Besides, if anything goes missing around here, it isn't my fault." I stopped walking, slowly turned around. "What do you mean?" He shrugged casually. "I can't control what my buddies do." Then he laughed, like it was somehow funny. That sentence stayed with me for a long time, because it wasn't an apology, it was practically a confession. The landlord received complaint after complaint. Noise, damage, security concerns, broken doors, broken lights, trash. Every tenant had photographs, some even had videos. Still, removing someone from a rental property isn't easy, especially when every incident can be blamed on visitors. Derek always had an excuse. "It wasn't me. I wasn't home. I don't know those guys. I can't be responsible for everyone else." Every conversation ended exactly the same way. Nothing changed. Then, one evening, George knocked on my door, carrying a small envelope. "It came for you." I frowned. "It wasn't in the hallway?" He shook his head. "I found it outside in the bushes." Inside the envelope was my replacement debit card. The envelope had already been opened. Fortunately, the card hadn't been activated yet. I immediately cancelled it anyway. As I held that empty envelope in my hands, something finally clicked. This wasn't random theft anymore. Whoever was taking my deliveries was checking everything. Packages, mail, bank cards, anything that looked valuable. And they were doing it so confidently, they didn't even care if I noticed. That was the moment I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste another day arguing with Derek. I wasn't going to accuse him without proof. Instead, I was going to let him make one mistake. Just one. Because people who get away with stealing long enough eventually become careless. And when that happened, I'd be ready. By that point, I had accepted one frustrating reality. Every time I ordered something online, there was a good chance it would never make it inside my apartment. I started timing my deliveries around my work schedule. If Amazon said a package would arrive between 1 and 3, I'd take my lunch break early and sit near the front window. If UPS sent a notification, I'd rush downstairs the moment my phone buzzed. It was exhausting. Living in your own home shouldn't feel like guarding a vault. The worst part wasn't losing the money. Most online retailers eventually refunded me. The real problem was the constant feeling that someone was watching every delivery. It didn't matter whether it was a birthday gift, a pair of shoes, office supplies, or groceries. If it was left unattended for even a few minutes, it disappeared. I even tried adding delivery instructions in bold capital letters. "Do not leave package unattended." Some drivers followed them, most didn't. They'd drop the package inside the shared entrance, take a photo, and drive away. 5 minutes later, the package was gone. One afternoon, I came home expecting a delivery worth nearly $300. The tracking page proudly displayed, "Delivered." I walked through the front entrance. Nothing. I checked outside. Nothing. I knocked on George's door. "No package?" He shook his head. Helen looked too. Nothing. Mr. Whittaker checked his security camera facing the street. The delivery driver had clearly carried my package inside, then drove away. Less than 3 minutes later, one of Derek's regular visitors entered the building. He walked out, carrying a package tucked under his jacket. Mine. Clear as day. Unfortunately, the camera only covered the street, not the hallway. You could see him enter empty-handed and leave carrying something, but you couldn't actually see him take it. Still, it confirmed exactly what I'd suspected all along. The thefts weren't random. They happened almost immediately after deliveries arrived. Someone inside that apartment was watching. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at another refund request. Then, I looked across the room at several empty shipping boxes I'd saved for recycling. An idea slowly formed. Not revenge, evidence. I didn't need to catch Derek stealing expensive electronics. I simply needed to catch someone stealing something they believed was valuable. I opened one of the empty boxes. Inside, I placed an old grocery bag, then an apple. The apple gave the package enough weight to feel real. The plastic bag stopped it from rattling. From the outside, it looked exactly like a freshly delivered online order. I taped it shut, placed one of the original shipping labels back on the box, then made 3 more. Each one looked convincing. Each one contained nothing worth stealing. The next morning, I drove to an electronics store, not to buy anything expensive, to buy a small indoor security camera, high definition, wide-angle lens, motion detection, cloud recording. Most importantly, it could be mounted discreetly where almost nobody would notice it. Back home, I spent nearly an hour testing different positions. Too high, and it missed the packages. too low and someone might spot it. Eventually, I found the perfect angle. From where it sat, the camera captured the shared hallway, the entrance door, and the exact spot where delivery drivers always left packages. Perfect. Now all I had to do was wait. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait very long. 2 days later, I carried one of the fake packages downstairs, looked around. The hallway was empty. I placed the box beside my apartment door, exactly where a delivery driver normally would, then quietly walked back upstairs. From my living room, I opened the camera app on my phone. The live feed appeared instantly. Now, it was simply a matter of patience. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. Then, the main entrance opened. Not Derek, one of his regular friends, a man I'd seen dozens of times over the previous year. He glanced down the hallway, looked left, looked right, then smiled. Without the slightest hesitation, he bent down, picked up my package, tucked it under his arm, and casually walked straight into Derek's apartment. The entire theft took less than 6 seconds. I stared at the screen, then slowly smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't have a suspicion. I didn't have a theory. I had crystal clear video evidence. And I had a feeling Derek had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I replayed the recording at least 10 times, not because I needed to, because after years of watching my deliveries disappear, it almost didn't feel real. The video couldn't have been clearer. The hallway was empty. The fake package sat exactly where I'd left it. Then the front door opened. Derek's friend walked inside. He glanced around for barely a second, picked up the package, walked straight into Derek's apartment. No hesitation, no confusion, no attempt to ask whose package it was. He simply stole it, as though he'd done it hundreds of times before. Maybe he had. I immediately backed up the recording to 3 different places: my laptop, an external hard drive, cloud storage. There was no way I was risking that evidence disappearing. Only after everything was safely copied did I call the police. The dispatcher listened carefully. I have security footage of someone stealing my package. She asked a few routine questions, then said an officer would be sent over. About 30 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the driveway. Officer Melissa Grant introduced herself. I invited her inside. Instead of immediately showing her the video, I explained everything from the beginning. The missing packages, the stolen bank cards, the damaged property, the late-night visitors, the complaints from every tenant. Then I played the recording. She watched silently. When it ended, she asked me to play it again. The second time, she paused the video several times, zooming in, looking carefully at the man's face. When she finished, she looked at me and smiled. I have to admit, this is one of the better setups I've seen. I laughed. I've had years to think about it. I can tell. Officer Grant stepped outside and checked the hallway herself, then knocked on George's apartment. A few minutes later, she spoke with Mr. Whitaker as well. Everyone told the same story. Missing deliveries, constant disturbances, unknown visitors. Nobody had proof until now. When she returned, she carefully placed the evidence drive into an evidence bag. "This gives us theft," she said. "But," she hesitated, "it also confirms something we've been hearing for quite a while." "What do you mean?" She looked toward Derek's apartment. "We've received a number of anonymous complaints about this address. Drug activity, suspicious visitors, possible dealing." I wasn't surprised, neither was anyone else in the building. Before leaving, Officer Grant asked one final question. "Do you honestly believe Derek is involved?" I answered without hesitation. "I do." "Why?" "Because his friends never steal from anyone else in the building. They only steal things that belong to me. And they always walk straight into his apartment afterward." She nodded thoughtfully. "I can't promise anything, but this recording definitely helps." I thanked her. As she reached the front door, I remembered something. "There may be one more thing you should know." She turned back. "Derek has told several people he sells drugs. I've never seen it directly. But people come and go, 24 hours a day. They stay for 2 minutes, then leave." She didn't react. She simply wrote another note. "I appreciate you telling me." Life returned to normal, at least it appeared to. Derek had no idea the camera existed. His friend had never noticed it. Neither of them knew the police now had crystal clear footage. A week passed, then another. Nothing happened. No arrests, no follow-up, no phone calls. I started wondering whether the theft investigation had stalled. Maybe there wasn't enough evidence after all. Maybe it would become just another report buried beneath hundreds of others. Then, almost 3 weeks later, my phone rang. Officer Grant. "Good morning, Olivia. Do you have a minute?" "Of course." "I wanted to let you know. We identified the man who stole your package." I smiled. "That's great," she continued. "And we've also been looking much more closely at Derek's apartment." There was something different in her voice. Careful, measured, like she couldn't say everything she wanted to. Before hanging up, she said one sentence that stayed with me. "Please don't mention this conversation to anyone." "We're not finished yet," I frowned. "What do you mean?" There was a brief pause, then she quietly replied, "Let's just say, your stolen package may have opened a much bigger door than either of us expected." 5 days passed after my conversation with Officer Grant. I didn't hear anything else. No updates, no arrests, no suspicious activity. At least, nothing out of the ordinary for Derek. His apartment was still busy every night. Cars came and went. People stayed for only a few minutes before disappearing again. Sometimes they'd leave carrying backpacks. Other times, they'd arrive empty-handed and leave with their pockets noticeably fuller. It wasn't subtle. It never had been. The difference was, now someone else was watching too. The following Friday, I was awakened by my phone vibrating on my nightstand. I rolled over and glanced at the screen. 6:58 a.m. Officer Melissa Grant. My heart immediately started racing. I answered. "Hello?" Her voice was calm. "Olivia, I need you to do exactly what I say." I sat upright. "Okay, we're outside. Can you quietly come downstairs and unlock the main entrance?" I looked at the clock again, still before 7. "What happened?" "I'll explain later. For now, please don't make any unnecessary noise, and don't look outside until I tell you." Something in her voice told me this wasn't just about a stolen package anymore. I quickly got dressed, walked downstairs as quietly as I could, unlocked the front entrance. The moment the door clicked open, Officer Grant gently guided me back inside. "Go back to your apartment and stay there." Curiosity got the better of me. The second I reached my front door, I looked through the peephole. What I saw completely stunned me. The parking area across the street was filled with unmarked vehicles. Plain SUVs, pickup trucks, sedans, nothing with flashing lights, nothing that screamed police. Then I noticed the people. Officers. A lot of them. Some wore tactical vests, others were dressed like ordinary construction workers. A few stood behind a brick wall across the street. Several more quietly moved into position near the back of the building. I tried counting. 12. Then 13. Finally, I gave up. There had to be at least 15 officers. This wasn't a routine visit. Nobody spoke. Nobody shouted. The entire operation was almost completely silent. One officer glanced toward Officer Grant. She nodded once. That was the signal. Within seconds, everything exploded into motion. Officers rushed toward Derek's apartment from every direction. One team covered the rear exit, another secured the hallway. A third approached his front door. I heard someone yell, "Police!" Then, a deafening crash. The front door splintered inward. For a brief moment, the entire building shook. People started shouting. Several voices screamed from inside Derek's apartment. Another officer yelled, "Don't move! Hands where we can see them. The hallway filled with heavy footsteps. Then, silence. The entire raid had lasted less than 2 minutes. About 15 minutes later, Officer Grant knocked softly on my door. "It's okay. You can come out now." When I stepped into the hallway, the apartment barely looked recognisable. The front door hung crooked from its hinges. Evidence technicians were already carrying boxes outside. Real evidence boxes, not little bags, large cardboard containers, one after another. I watched an officer carefully seal one with evidence tape. Another carried out several smaller containers. A third photographed everything before it left the apartment. Then I noticed something else. People. Not just Derek. There were 4 other adults being escorted outside in handcuffs. Some I'd seen visiting dozens of times, others I'd never seen before. All of them looked shocked. Derek looked furious. As officers walked him toward an unmarked SUV, his eyes locked onto mine, for just a second. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look on his face made one thing perfectly clear. He knew. Somehow, he knew this had started with me. Officer Grant walked over once everything had calmed down. "You were right," she said quietly. "About what?" "Everything." She looked toward the evidence team. "We recovered a significant quantity of narcotics. Packaging materials, cash, and several stolen items we're still identifying." I stood there speechless. All of this because someone couldn't resist stealing one fake package. Officer Grant smiled slightly. "Your camera footage didn't solve everything, but it gave us the reason we needed to start looking much more closely." Then she added something I'd never forget. "Sometimes, the smallest crime is what finally exposes the biggest one." I watched as another evidence box was loaded into a police vehicle. At that moment, I realised Derek hadn't been arrested because of my package. He'd been arrested because years of arrogance had finally caught up with him, and the package was simply the first domino to fall. For the first time in years, the building was quiet. Not quieter, actually quiet. No pounding on the front door at 2 a.m, no strangers wandering through the hallway, no arguments outside my bedroom window, no music shaking the walls. That first night after the raid, I slept nearly 10 hours without waking up once. I honestly couldn't remember the last time that had happened. The next morning, the hallway looked completely different. Maintenance workers had already replaced the broken apartment door. The shattered lock was gone. Fresh paint covered the damaged frame. George walked downstairs carrying his morning newspaper. He smiled at me, a genuine smile. "I forgot birds actually make noise in the morning." I laughed. So did I. Helen opened her apartment door a few seconds later. "It's amazing." "What is?" "The silence." For the first time since I'd moved into the building, nobody was whispering about Derek. Nobody was nervously looking toward his apartment. Everyone simply relaxed. A few days later, Officer Grant called again. "I wanted to update you. How's the investigation going?" As expected, she couldn't discuss every detail, but she did tell me enough to understand what had happened. The detectives recovered several large boxes of illegal narcotics, cash, packaging materials, digital scales, stolen property from multiple victims, even several unopened packages that had never reached their rightful owners. I quietly asked, "Any of mine?" She laughed softly. "Possibly. We're still identifying everything." Then she added something that surprised me. "The theft video you recorded. It's now part of a much larger case. Over the following week, detectives contacted several residents on our street, people who'd experienced break-ins, missing deliveries, damaged vehicles. Many of them finally came forward, not because they suddenly had new evidence, because they finally believed someone was listening. It turned out, our neighbourhood had been dealing with the same problems for years. Everyone had assumed reporting small thefts wouldn't matter. Individually, none of the cases looked significant. Together, they painted a very different picture. Then something happened I hadn't expected. The landlord called. He asked if I could stop by his office after work. When I arrived, he placed a folder on the desk. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For finally giving us something we could act on." He explained that tenants had complained about Derek for years. Noise, property damage, unauthorised visitors, broken security doors, police visits. The problem had always been the same. Complaints alone weren't enough, but now everything had changed. The police had contacted him directly. They'd confirmed the raid, the arrests, the ongoing criminal investigation. Combined with the security footage I'd provided, he finally had legal grounds to terminate Derek's lease. The eviction process had already begun. A week later, I came home from work and noticed an official notice taped to Derek's apartment door. Large letters across the top read, "Notice of Termination of Tenancy." Several neighbours had already seen it. George looked over from his doorway. I never thought I'd see that. Neither did I. For years. Derek had acted as though nobody could touch him, as though every rule applied to everyone else, not him. Now, his apartment would soon be empty. About 3 weeks after the raid, a moving truck pulled into the parking lot. Not because Derek had hired professional movers, because several family members had come to collect whatever belongings hadn't been seized by police. Boxes were carried outside, one after another. Old furniture, mattresses, clothes, televisions. The process took almost the entire afternoon. Nobody spoke. Nobody argued. The constant stream of visitors that had once filled the building had completely disappeared. By sunset, the apartment was empty. One final police evidence seal remained across part of the doorway. The nightmare was over. About a month later, I checked the shared mailbox before heading upstairs. One compartment was overflowing. Envelope after envelope. Utility bills, advertisements, official government letters, court notices, everything addressed to Derek. None of it had been collected. George walked by and chuckled. "Looks like he won't be needing those." I smiled. "Probably not." As I climbed the stairs, I glanced one last time at the overflowing mailbox. It struck me as strangely symbolic. For years, Derek had taken mail that didn't belong to him. Now, his own mail sat there untouched, waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. It's been several years since Derek was arrested. I've moved to a different apartment now. Ironically, I still have packages delivered to my front door. Only now, they actually stay there. Every time I receive the notification that says, "Your package has been delivered," I smile. Because I no longer feel the need to race home. I no longer worry that someone is watching my delivery driver. I no longer wonder whether my package will still be there 5 minutes later. That constant anxiety simply disappeared. I hadn't realised how exhausting it had been until it was gone. A few months after Derek's eviction, I ran into my old landlord while grabbing coffee downtown. He recognised me immediately. "Olivia, I've been meaning to thank you." I laughed. "I think you already did." He shook his head. "No, I don't think I thanked you enough." We sat down for a few minutes. He told me something I'd never known. Apparently, several families had considered moving out before the raid. One elderly couple had already started looking for another apartment. A young family had refused to renew their lease because they no longer felt safe letting their children walk through the shared hallway. The building's reputation had become so bad, people avoided renting there altogether. "I honestly thought we'd lose the property," he admitted. "But after everything happened," he smiled, "it's full again. And this time, we actually have good tenants." That made me happier than I expected. Not long afterward, George called me. He and Helen had remained close friends after I moved. "You'll never guess what happened." "What?" "They renovated the entrance." "So?" "They installed secure package lockers." I laughed. Finally! No more boxes sitting in the hallway. No more missing deliveries. No more strangers wandering through the building. It sounded like such a small improvement. But to everyone who had lived there, it represented something much bigger. Normal life had returned. Every once in a while, someone asks whether planting the camera was worth all the trouble. Absolutely. Not because it helped catch one package thief, because it finally gave everyone something we'd been missing for years. Proof. Without proof, every complaint sounded like gossip. Every accusation became one person's word against another's. The moment the camera recorded 6 seconds of theft, everything changed. Those 6 seconds started an investigation. The investigation uncovered drug trafficking. The raid led to arrests. The arrests led to an eviction. One simple piece of evidence changed an entire neighbourhood. Looking back, people often assume the fake package was my revenge. It wasn't. The fake package didn't hurt anyone. It simply gave someone the opportunity to make a choice. Derek's friend chose to steal it. Derek chose to surround himself with people like that. Derek chose to leave the building unsecured. Derek chose to ignore every warning. Derek chose to keep believing nobody would ever stop him. Those were his decisions, not mine. All I did was place an empty box in a hallway. Everything after that was built on choices he and his friends made for themselves. There's one lesson this experience taught me that I'll never forget. Some people think they're untouchable because they've gotten away with the same behaviour for years. Every successful lie makes them bolder. Every stolen package makes them more confident. Every unanswered complaint convinces them they'll never face consequences. But confidence has a dangerous side. Eventually, people stop being careful. They stop looking over their shoulder. They stop asking, what if this time is different? That's exactly what happened to Derek. He wasn't arrested because I was smarter than him. He wasn't evicted because I wanted revenge. He was arrested because years of arrogance convinced him he could steal one more package without consequences. He was wrong. Sometimes justice doesn't begin with a major crime. Sometimes it begins with a missing package. Sometimes the smallest piece of evidence opens the door to the biggest investigation. And sometimes the person who believes they're untouchable ends up losing everything over something they considered too insignificant to matter. The last time I drove past that old building, I noticed something that made me smile. A delivery driver placed 2 packages inside the secure locker by the entrance. He closed the door, locked it, and drove away. No one came running outside. No one looked around before grabbing someone else's property. The hallway stayed quiet. The packages stayed exactly where they belonged. For most people, that probably wouldn't seem remarkable. For me, it was the perfect ending. Because after years of stolen deliveries, sleepless nights, broken trust, and one unforgettable police raid, the greatest reward wasn't watching Derek get arrested. It was finally living in a place where ordinary people could receive a package without wondering if it would still be there 5 minutes later.